So let's talk about ego. Makes sense on a narcissism channel? We all have an ego. We need our egos, right? It's not all bad. Ego is what gives us a sense of self, a sense of separateness, and even a sense of other. The word ego, though, has gotten twisted in popular usage. People hear the word ego and they think egotistical or egocentric, all that narcissistic-y stuff. But no, healthy ego is what all of us desperately need. Frankly, it's what narcissistic people definitely do not have. And sadly, if you've been through a narcissistic relationship, your healthy ego has been chipped too. And don't get any grand ideas. People with healthy egos can still get sucked into narcissistic relationships, while a healthy ego can be in some ways a protection. It's not a guarantee you will be able to dodge the charm and charisma and love bombing. Healthy ego is a sense of self, advocating for ourselves, a healthy selfishness. For example, setting a boundary for our own good. It's being able to hold our own beliefs, even while others are pushing back on them, without getting into a yelling match, or even when others have different beliefs than ours. It's knowing who we are. Healthy ego is great. It can make healing go much more smoothly, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Now, narcissistic people have very unhealthy egos, fragile, unhealthily selfish, sensitive, brittle, and because their egos are so fragile and sensitive, they react strongly, aggressively, or unkindly when their egos are bruised. You already know that story. You've lived it. But what about not narcissistic people? Can people without this kind of personality style have unhealthy or less than healthy egos? And the answer to that is a resounding yes, unfortunately. And I'm pretty sure that most of us have some unhealthy ego. Our unhealthy ego is the part of us that needs to get the last word in, that doesn't want to be the first one to apologize, that is scared to be vulnerable, that can be competitive in an unhealthy manner, that can be vindictive or petty or even entitled. And you can be those things and not be narcissistic. Listen, I'm owning it. I just today got very angry at someone who had been poking at me for a while, and I couldn't take it anymore. And it had been sort of 48 unrelenting hours of their BS. I simply said, I just can't do this. And I left the restaurant, which is usually not my way. Frankly, I cooled down in about 5 minutes, and I knew that the healthy thing was to go back into the restaurant and be better and show up better. But it was just like there were these wild horses keeping me in the car. And it was like they were not wanting me to let them get away with it, that if I went in there first, they would be getting away with it. And that was my unhealthy ego, and it felt very hard to resist. In full disclosure, I let the unhealthy ego win that one, and I stubbornly stayed in the car, and the other person had cooled down too, and then they came back because they needed to get in the car to go, but we're good, and I saw that unhealthy ego in me at least comes out to play, especially when I have had prolonged exposure to this kind of bad abusive behavior, or I'm tired. Now, unhealthy ego is often our protective defenses at play, a sort of artificial sense of strength we create to avoid feeling vulnerable and ashamed and triggered. But here is the problem. That unhealthy ego will be costly when you are trying to heal from these relationships because it can keep you pulled into their vortex. Your unhealthy ego is sometimes the part of you that gets into the mud with them, even when the radical acceptance voices are saying, no, 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 please don't. Your unhealthy ego is the part of you that may lead you to want to post stuff on social media about them. That is probably not a good thing to post. And that might make you look bad too, or that tries to outplay them in a legal maneuver that ends up costing you even more money or goodwill. In divorces, the unhealthy ego is a disaster. The only winners here are the attorneys and the other different sideshow players that make money on these drawn-out divorces. The system is rigged and often favors the narcissistic folks. Bottom line, in a divorce with a narcissistic person, most often you will not get a fair settlement. You'll probably not get a custody agreement that's healthy for your children. That's the realistic expectation to walk in with. And really, the judge doesn't give a rat's ass that the narcissistic person you used to be married to already met someone new and wants to marry them. The judge simply wants the process to go expeditiously and in line with the law. And no matter how much good advice there is out there, things like keep quiet, let the narcissistic person be the one who melts down in court, be prepared with them to not cooperate with the process, be prepared for them to tell your child terrible things about you, and recognize that this whole shit show is unjust. But when the unhealthy ego wants to fight, the attorneys make money, and the money you are fighting about goes to the divorce. And the narcissistic person continues to make a mess of everything and gets away with it. The more your unhealthy ego wants justice in these situations, the worse it often becomes. Wanting justice isn't the bad thing. It's the not letting go that's the problem. The stubbornness of the unhealthy ego that can keep you locked in a toxic multi-year dance. I got to tell you, I've never heard someone say, I wish I fought harder and longer for more money and kept fighting them in court longer. But I have heard hundreds of people say, I wish I had understood what all of this was better, so I didn't waste years of mine and my children's lives in this fight. They ended up with what they wanted anyhow, and I got as little as I was always going to get. Your healthy ego may actually get as good of a settlement as your unhealthy ego without as much collateral damage to you. But none of this is easy. That natural fight in you, it is natural. In families, the unhealthy ego also shows up hard. It's that stubborn part of you that may still keep having the same fights or takes the bait in the same way that you always have. It's the belief that I'm going to tell them this and they are going to hear it. Now, the healthy ego may say it, but the unhealthy ego is what believes that the narcissistic person will hear it. And once again, the unhealthy ego means that you keep carouseling around the same fights, the same disappointments, the same insults, and the same wounds with no resolution. The healthy ego is better at letting go because it wants to preserve the healthy part of you. At work, the unhealthy ego means that you keep getting lost in office politics. You get into the petty BS nonsense with the narcissistic or simply petty colleagues. Unhealthy ego often means that we put too much weight into the titles and the little bits of supply that we can get from work. You can get pulled into the gossip or ruminate about why the person who manages to manipulate the boss and is incompetent gets the promotion. Unhealthy ego gets stuck in that swamp. The healthy ego that can't leave the job does it and then clocks out at the end of the day or gets the hell out of Dodge. This distinction is important because the unhealthy ego shows up and behaves in defensive, reactive ways rather than from a place of knowing who we are. And since we all have an unhealthy ego, it's just bigger in some people than others, and yes, the narcissistic folks have the biggest unhealthy egos. When our unhealthy ego is in the house, it slows down healing. It keeps us stuck in rumination. It draws out the legal stuff. It leads to the same fights. And it can result in us behaving in ways that, frankly, we are not proud of. None of us are perfect. We aren't. That's the nature of being a person. And that unhealthy ego will show up, especially when we are more depleted. But keep an eye out for it when you are healing from narcissistic relationships. Bottom line, you can't beat a narcissistic person at their own game. And if you try, you will waste more time than you've already spent. But hold space and be kind to that unhealthy ego. It isn't bad. It's just that frustrated 3-year-old child in us that needs a nap, that wants to be heard and wants things to be fair. those wants in and of itself are not a bad thing. So just say, I get it, and it sucks that it isn't fair. And I know you want to scream in this other person's face and tell them that you hope that their new girlfriend cheats on them and that you just want them to face some consequences. That's what your unhealthy ego wants, and it's completely understandable. It's normal. Just don't let the unhealthy ego run the show. The healthy ego can sometimes become tired of being the emotional support ego for the unhealthy ego. But once we understand the fight and the drive for justice, and even that revenge is normal, or I should say the desire for revenge is normal, but keep our eye on the larger prize of living more in line with who we are and not playing defense to the narcissist's offense. That's the win. Because when that happens, then the healthy ego can peacefully run the show. But again, it is that unhealthy ego that says, if I step back, then it means they've won. The healthy ego is able to say, if you can get the hell out of this relationship and be disengaged from it and live your life healthily, yeah, so what, they got more money, but you won because you get to be you. That's the healthy ego talking. But it's really, really hard. However, the more the healthy ego drives the train, the faster you're going to get to the destination. But be nice to the unhealthy ego. And if anything, tuck it in for a nap. Thanks again.